we're often so much more intentional in our professional lives than we are in our personal lives,
Yeah.
because our family's always there. So they're just always going to be there, right? It's almost like a given.
Right.
And we often, just even by virtue of the daytime hours, give our best to our business, and then even physically are worn out, tired, whatever it is when we get home. But I think the same principles that work in business work in the family as well, is understanding, what is it that I'm trying to do, and where are my children, and how do I consciously either carve out time or understand them as a priority or whatever else. And I'll be the first one to say that I have often struggled with that,
Right.
um, because I felt like it was so important to be intentional and so important to have that sometimes I would discount just the time together.
Johannes Mutzke, you've made it. We are here at the Johnson basement. It's a new setting for me. So thank you for being sort of my first guy into this setting today. How are you?
Good. Happy to be the guinea pig in the setting. It's amazing. And I know it's been a long time in coming, and we've tried, and now we're here. So I'm
Yes.
excited.
Yes. We have many years of history at my former company, Red Elm. And you have been such a leader in strategy and business coaching. I feel like what my first memories of you were, Nate would kind of like hide you. I feel like in the like early mornings, you had to have meetings. They're like, who is this Johannes guy? And then as like the company grew, I was more involved with you, and to the point where like they were having these big sort of meeting sessions with different like, team leaders. So you've always been sort of that coach mentor figure. It originally behind the curtain, and that even now we have a good friendship. So how's coaching going? Are you still, tell me more about what you're doing in the coaching world?
Yeah. So maybe just a little bit of background. I came up through not a coaching background. I worked in big companies for a while, both BMW, Michelin, and always found myself, I would say, like an entrepreneur in a corporate skin. I
Okay.
keep saying. So,
Okay.
and what that means is you're in a big company, but you always gravitate towards like areas of change or things that are starting,
Mhm.
or often areas that are not working, and they just
Mhm.
need somebody who likes to do different stuff and go there. And so a little bit of the way that I think I'm wired is I sort of like fixing things. I love working with people. Growing up in school and even at university, I felt like I was never the smartest. In fact, I felt like I was the opposite, and I had to really work hard to get good results. And so the way that I typically succeeded was I had to sort of outwork others,
Mhm.
which means I also had to understand something at a very simple level for it to make sense in my mind.
Mhm.
They always say some of the best math teachers are those that struggled with math, because
Mhm.
other people think it's so obvious.
Right.
And so I think coming up through that sort of mindset of having to figure things out for myself and understanding how things work really helped once we started our company in consulting for businesses, of helping break things down for people to get it really simple. Like,
Mhm.
what do we want to do? And therefore, how do you work to actually get that done?
Mhm.
And I often find people stuck on one end of that spectrum or the other. Like, it's all ideas and we never get to doing,
Right.
or it's just doing randomly and we're not even sure why we're doing it.
Right. Right.
There's a great Japanese proverb that I love that says, vision without action is a daydream, and action without vision is a nightmare. And so I feel like there are people stuck on both. And one of the things I think I bring, and our company brings, that I've learned over time, the hard way many times, is how to take things we want to do. And because I've learned with blood, sweat, and tears in my own life, how to actually do something about it and get results. And
Mm.
so having come up through that background I just told you about, I think sort of conditioned me for that.
I never knew that about you in regards to the way you viewed yourself in college, or, growing up, that not being the smartest. And I feel like you have definitely found your sweet spot in breaking things down so simply. In fact, before you hit record, we were talking about, my coaching experience and who I'm using. And there's such a beauty in just having somebody sit with you, have the know-how of like how businesses should run, but also just listening and then reflecting, like, what are you trying to do here, and putting those steps in place. I think I'm just more curious, the type of people you're helping now. Um, what are some maybe common things, or I think we kind of joked like these CEOs of these large, medic companies or medicals, they just kind of have their tail between their legs. I didn't get my homework done this week. What are
Yeah.
you seeing right now with just um, ways you're helping people specifically?
Yeah. So, we do business with all kinds of companies, big Fortune 500 companies to startup
Mhm.
garages who are fast growth. Um, and I think the definition of a growing company, and I would say that's where we focus is on growth, is that there's always change. Right. And so when you're changing, it feels like you're always transitioning from something that you were doing to something you're aspiring to do at the next level, which means that what got you here is not necessarily going to get you there. Now,
Right.
there are some things underlying that will always be important, but typically in a transition, you have to do something different to get a different result. They always say the definition of insanity is continue doing what you're doing and you get the same results. Like we're going to have to change something.
Mhm.
And so a lot of these leaders face some kind of an inflection point. I'm going to have to change something. And it can be in the business itself. Like in order to launch a new product line or get into this new line of business, we're going to have to change the business.
Mhm.
Um, there's also sometimes or oftentimes personal things they have to change. Like I'm going to have to lead differently. I'm going to have to find ways to delegate. I'm going to have to get a leadership team.
Mhm.
I can't be involved in everything all the time and micromanage all the time. I'm going to have to guard my time and set priorities more clearly for me and my team. So,
Mhm.
so there's a piece of it that is like, what does the business have to do differently, and how do we structure that?
Right.
And then also, how do I as a person have to lead
Mhm.
differently? So that's where a lot of our coaching focuses. And we don't only do coaching. Sometimes we actually jump into, you know, we take a project and we do it for them
Yes.
because there's a piece of work that needs to be done. So we often
Mhm.
do that. But a lot of our work focuses, whether we're doing project or coaching, on people
Mhm.
themselves, right?
Mhm.
Behaviors are where it's at.
Yeah.
Um, and some people lack structure around that often.
Mhm.
They think that growth or success is like, oh, let's look at a successful company like Airbnb or Uber, pick your company and poof, they were just geniuses.
Mhm.
Um, and I think there's a real discipline and approach for how to get there. And I think we adapt that to the people that we're working with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. People obviously, I love the notion of the one-on-one, like as a guy, I don't know, just what do I need to fix? Like, what's the to do? But it's
Yeah.
like, well, let's go. How are you thinking about this
Yeah.
thing? And it's like, I don't want to go there. I just want to tell me what to do so I can get
Yes.
these results. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, are you leading? So actually transitioning that idea to fatherhood,
Yeah.
Invested Fathers is the podcast
Yeah.
where, um, really trying to focus on as dads, how can we invest for our families, into ourselves, and see the returns that matter to us. And, if you would have asked me, like, what's investing look like, previous Kenny, money, 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 money. It's
Yeah.
talk a lot about finances. But as I've sort of gotten older, and sort of, our family's growing. I have a 3-year-old and 8-year-old at home. I'm seeing more of that need to, be invested physically, present, time, energy, emotions, um, relationships with my son, that kind of thing. It is very rewarding to see, you know, drops put into these buckets with them and seeing the returns there. Tell me a little bit about your family. How many kids do we have? What's everyone up to nowadays?
So, married, of course, and have three girls.
Yeah.
So I always joke that I'm surrounded by women.
Yes.
I think so. We have three dogs, believe it or not. Two of them are also female. One of them is male. So,
Yes.
so
We
even
got one
more,
in there.
yeah. So I do have a pet that is male, but nonetheless, very, very blessed with that. I never dreamed that it would be all girls, and I love the way it is. Obviously, I wouldn't know what it is differently. Um, but of course, that has its own dynamic. And
I'm sure.
so they're all, I would say, on the more older teenager to adult side of the spectrum. So my youngest is 17, middle one is 20, and the oldest is 23, and married. So I'm still sort of coming to grips with the reality that I have a married child, which,
Right.
when you're holding your little baby, how in the world where did the time go? How did this happen?
Right.
So that's a little bit about my family.
Just to kind of explore a little more of like hobbies and pastimes, what are some of the things that rather you enjoyed doing with them as they're growing up? And then what are some things that you kind of doing now with them? I know time is obviously, we're talking about business and working stuff, but
Yeah.
when you guys are together, what are some fun things you guys like to do together or share?
Yeah. So I would say, not to tie it all back to the business side, but I think uh, one of the things that is so important, I think, in fatherhood is intentionality. And we're often so much more intentional in our professional lives than we are in our personal lives,
Yeah.
because our family's always there, so they're just always going to be there, right? It's almost like a given.
Right.
And we often, just even by virtue of the daytime hours, give our best to our business, and then even physically are worn out, tired, whatever it is when we get home. But I think the same principles that work in business work in the family as well, is understanding, what is it that I'm trying to do, and where are my children, and how do I consciously either carve out time or understand them as a priority or whatever else. And I'll be the first one to say that I have often struggled with that,
Right.
um, because I felt like it was so important to be intentional and so important to have that sometimes I would discount just the time together.
Okay.
I remember, especially because I have girls, we would sit on the floor and play dolls, or we would dance, or we would do things like that together. And there's this voice in the back of my head that would be like, "Oh, this is a real waste of time."
Okay.
We should be like doing something more meaningful together. We should be like
Right.
reading a book, reading the Bible, talking about God, which of course is important.
Right.
Like for
Right.
me, especially,
Right.
faith is the cornerstone. But I think a lot of times it's the intentional just time soaking together.
Mhm.
It's not that's always random, but especially when children are small, their love language and their way of endearing themselves to you and to each other is spending time together.
Mhm.
And at the most random moments, the quality time happens in the midst of the quantity time.
Mhm.
But if there's something that I wish I would have done more, I think it's just more of that quantity time, because the way I'm wired is it's got to be quality. So we almost like have to have an agenda for this time together, you know. Whereas they just
I
want
love it.
to sit on my lap
Right.
and for me to tell them a story,
Yeah.
and then they'll ask a random question, and all of a sudden we're having, it was all quality, but extra quality.
Right.
So
I I love this conversation right now. When do we learn that thing? Like what we're
yeah,
talking about. It's like, when does that, oh, I just need to enjoy this moment on, because I'm right there.
yeah,
I have a 3-year-old girl,
yeah,
Daphne, and what does she want to do all the time? She wants, Daddy, play in my room. And what that means is I lay on the floor and I just lay, it looks like it's this big old like beached whale. I grabbed the Pocahontas toy and she wants to have a birthday party, at this little house thing. It's always the same thing. It's
yeah,
always her birthday. It's not anyone else's.
yeah,
But just, and it has to be 5 minutes. I don't think she even knows what 5 minutes is, but 5 minutes, and when 5 minutes is done, it's 5 more minutes. And, it's just, and I do think that this is a waste of, like
yeah,
I need to do this thing. I have to do
yeah,
this thing. But I know she loves it.
yeah,
You can just see this like yearning and
yeah,
she's waiting for me. I'm brushing my teeth or I'm doing
yeah,
something. So very reflective for
yeah,
me, or, oh, reflective for you. And for me, it's like, oh, listen to what Johannes is saying
yeah,
and like enjoy this
yeah.
time with them.
I think back to sort of the idea of big picture, where are we going, and action.
Mhm.
So I think that of just spending time together is on the action side. I do think I I think one of the things that was really good for us is we would occasionally sort of take a step back. I would take a step back and say, for each one of my children, where are they in their life, and sort of what is the next thing that I want to that I think is important for their development, whether that's, developing their own spiritual life, or something academic, or a skill that they wanted to refine, or encouraging them in a certain way, or something I have to adapt. And so that when we're spending time together, I'm doing that with a big picture in mind of, here's an area I want to influence them in.
Yes.
And that way you have both the quantity and the quality. They're
Hmm.
not opposing,
Hmm.
but the intentionality can flow into that.
Yes.
And so I remember, like, sometimes as part of my New Year's reflections, I would write down the name of each one of the children, and I would say, what is sort of the next thing that I think about them? And where do I feel like their next stage of development is? What is God directing me towards? What am I seeing? And how do I influence them in that way? Um, you look back and you think, wow, probably could have done a lot better in certain areas. I probably, if I'm self-critical, spent too much time on the professional side and providing and breadwinning and all of that, to where there was not a lot of not sufficient energy left. So, um, but I think those early years, especially when you have them in your home, are so important.
Mhm.
Somebody told me one time, and it is so true. You sort of take for granted when kids are young that they're always with you. Like it's always a given. Like
Mhm.
in your case, where are your kids? Here and here. You know,
Yes.
you can hear them screaming, right? There's no
Yes.
question where they are.
Right.
When they're older, like if you ask me where are my kids right now, I think one of them's at work. The other one's married, so I think she's at her house. The other one, I'm not exactly sure what she's doing today. They're all driving, they have their lives.
Right.
It's now much more decentralized.
Mhm.
Or at the beginning, they're all together,
Mhm.
you know. And so obviously your approach changes a lot,
Mhm.
but those phases of life are very different.
We went through a book on some previous episodes, The Intentional Father. I don't know if you've heard of that book, John Tyson. But I feel like the way you viewed even like the new year. You said you wrote down their names,
Yeah.
and it's Christmas time. We're very quickly approaching January 1st. I think people are probably thinking
Mm,
and are being asked, "What are your goals for
mm,
2025?"
mm,
Maybe if I could just dive a little bit deeper there in regards to your intentionality, because I want to applaud that.
yeah.
I used to think just being present is like kind of the goal. Like just be there, just
Mm-hmm.
be around. And we talked a little bit about that quantity time
Mm-hmm.
and doing that,
Mm-hmm.
but the quality focused energy of like, hey, this is something that I want to push. And different dads have said, I have 5 categories of things that we're doing, and or we have a weekly meeting and we kind of go over these things. Whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone kind of has their own thing. Any maybe big aha moment or something that you could maybe share as like, I did this thing intentionally and it was really kind of we saw whatever gain or return that you would, warrant with your kids that you could maybe share with the audience.
Yeah. I think a couple of things. I think one thing is never discount the hub, which is you and your wife.
Mm,
Um, the warmth of the nest is dictated by the warmth of that relationship,
mm,
and I think we often lose sight of that. So, to the extent my wife and I are on the same page, and
mhm,
our relationship is where it needs to be in every way, there's a direct correlation to the happiness and well-being of the kids, 100%.
absolutely.
And so I think a lot of times, maybe we get that out of our head, which is like, oh, well, the success here is both parents have to be 100% committed to the kids. And I've been there where, the kids or the parents end up, being the taxi service and you're driving them all around because they're doing all the things and they're involved in church. And that's all good.
Mhm,
But don't let that come at the expense of the relationship that you have together. Guard that time,
mhm,
even maybe at the expense of the kids not being able to do all the things because you need time away.
mhm,
You need to take a weekend off, which is really hard to do. Or
mhm,
you need to have a date night, or you need to spend time sitting at the kitchen counter for an hour and a half while they watch a movie or something else because you guys need to bond. Um, that pays for itself exponentially. So that'd be the number one thing that I would say and when you're talking or when it's you and your wife, it's not necessarily that we're talking about the agenda for the kids. You'll do that anyway. That comes automatically. I
right.
mean, anybody who has kids, don't worry, you'll talk about kids. It's probably talking about the other stuff that
Mm,
makes the marriage
mm,
really bond.
yeah,
That's important to be able to go back to the kids with energy
right,
and with love and with all the things that's pouring out of that. So I can't say enough about that. And then I would say with children, especially in our family, it was such that my wife did a lot of the at home stuff. And so it was natural for them to spend a lot of time, even doing special things like
mm,
driving around and whatever. So time with dad doing something special, like going on a trip together. I took them on trips sometimes, just them and me together, because our family's in Germany. I had the opportunity to take one of my daughters, just her and I, for a trip. Emmeline and I, my wife, took one of our daughters one time on a overseas trip, just them. Sometimes we go with the whole family, but those are really special times that they remember. So I think that's good. The other thing is involve the kids in what you're doing
mm,
in terms of helping others.
mhm,
That's probably something I underestimated, but now I look back on and so glad I did. So for a long time, we were involved in an inner city ministry, um, outreach, and spent a lot of time in underprivileged neighborhoods and mentoring and doing all kinds of things. And my daughters were very small. Celine was probably 6 or 7 or something, but I just took her along everywhere. And I'm not sure she helped very much, but she played with the kids. She was with me. To this day, it's one of the biggest, most life-changing memories they remember is being exposed to other in a different environment than they were, having the opportunity to see their parents working with others, giving themselves away to that, um, rubbing shoulders with people who were not like them at all and
Right.
didn't have the same conditions of growing up. So, you know, dragging them along in quotes into what you're doing and giving them a window, especially into how you're serving others, is huge. You
Yeah.
can talk about it a lot,
Yeah.
but them feeling it and seeing it is huge. I mean, that's also what I remember about my parents.
Yeah. I love each of those things you mentioned, the relationship, the one-on-one time, and then just them seeing you do. I mean, what have I heard here? Lessons aren't taught, they are caught. I don't know
Yeah.
if you said that or someone else has recently said that to me.
Mm,
And that is a resounding truth that I need to remember more
mm.
is just that idea of like what you do, the way you are acting is much more powerful than maybe the let's set these goals and let's talk about these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
You've mentioned the faith, and this is different people on here have different beliefs, and not like a purely Christian only, podcast.
Mm,
But I do like kind of going into the explorations of maybe motivations of why we want to be intentional,
mm.
and like what have been some maybe impactful moments that, or even lessons learned, not necessarily just from your kids' point of view, which I think those are very important, but like as a dad, what have been some maybe lessons learned in the bucket of how your faith has played parenting?
Yeah.
That's kind of a bit a loaded question.
Yeah. So a couple things. I'm sure there's a lot of answers I could give, but one of the things that somebody told me one time that I've always remembered is that as parents, you're God's tour guide to the world of what He's doing for your children. So think of what a tour guide does. You're going down a street and they're pointing to things. Oh, this house, this happened. Oh, this house, we're about to turn the corner and this is going to happen. And I think a lot of times with faith, especially, faith lives compartmentalized on Sunday mornings, and maybe you do family time, and you read the Bible together or something. Those are all great things. But I think it's up to parents to bring it to life in everyday life. And I was just talking yesterday about pointing out the God winks, which is like, hey, look, we were, I'll just make something up. We're running low on time and we got a parking place that's close to the front. You know what? That's God. That's God doing that for us. Hey, I forgot my key, but somebody was just around the corner and gave it to us, or we had to wait, but we met so-and-so. Maybe God wanted us to meet this person.
Yes.
And I think that's something that you're like, oh, wow, God is everywhere and He is working. But it's up to us to point that out. Look, this is what God's doing. Look, this is what God's doing. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times in the Old Testament, when they'd have a big victory, God would tell the children of Israel, I want you to make a pile of stones so that when your kids see it and ask you what it is, you'll say, oh yeah, that was this.
Wow.
I think it's up to parents to build piles of stones for their kids to say, hey, look, this is what God did. Remember that? Yeah. So whether that's remembering the things along the way or as they're happening, pointing them out.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is making it a regular thing. Like one of the things that I think my kids would always remember, and one of the most special times, is we would do family times together every night. Mm-hmm. We would sing, sometimes memorize a verse, read the Bible. At the beginning, it's story Bible together. I'm telling you, when the kids were small, it was like we could barely do it for 10 minutes before the whole thing collapsed. but we just did it. And,
right.
and it was some of their most special memories of like, oh, we have this sort of story time. And they associated that with, oh, it's about faith. It's about God. This is a special time. I think at the beginning, I'm not sure they understood it or absorbed that much. Although I would never discount, especially at a young age, they absorb much more than we think they do.
Yeah. I remember you mentioning before we were talking today about that, like singing together.
Yeah.
Which I think even that, just singing together, isn't common.
Yeah.
It is not a common thing. But girl dad, and you're leading, like your kids are seeing you, what is normal, and you're modeling very much, their future spouse or what they should be looking for in a guy. Yeah. And that intentionality and focus and just coming together and living your faith. Love the God winks thing. That's something that I will definitely be incorporating, because I think I'm kind of doing that, but I'm not necessarily, I've named it. Yeah. But like just being sort of aware and intentional around, hey, this is something that God's doing for us. Yeah. And letting that be part of our conversation throughout the day instead of compartmentalizing. Yeah. We're almost out of time, Johannes. Yeah. I always usually do a final takeaway. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I'm trying to also incorporate in these episodes is, how are we managing and protecting and growing and viewing our money with our families? The show is definitely centered around fathering and being a good dad, but I think there is a community that I'm trying to attract similar-minded people in regards to, hey, I'm very career-minded and business-focused on achieving these things. I'm wired this way. I love helping people this way. I have a at-home life, personal life that is also very important to me. But around the topic of your wealth and your time, give me some things that you're maybe a new aha moment or something that you're focusing on that specifically centers your intentionality toward protecting, growing your wealth for like the sake of time with your family and margin. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that our family, we had a single income, which was mine. Mm-hmm. And so, as I was managing the money that we had, there was not a lot left over a lot of times, because you had to take care of your obligations and the kids and whatever. But I always made it a point, and I think I was raised this way too, to try to save what I could, even if it was small. Mm-hmm. The challenge there was, I don't have a lot of time to study options of investing, and so I tried to use the vehicles that I had at my disposal, so 401ks and things like that, which I would suggest to everybody. I mean, just take the opportunities that you have and be a wise steward of those. And even if I know it sounds cliche, but even if you can't save a lot, save something. Mm-hmm. I think at where I am now in my life, as I've tried to think responsibly about that. On one hand, I want to be more intentional about that, and so I want to diversify. And so, because I don't have a lot of time, I found that using people who know what they're doing in those spaces has been really effective. And so one of the things that I've tried to do is I've thought about, how do I go beyond the stock market, for example, into investing in real estate. Mm-hmm. I don't have time to look at houses. I don't have time to renovate. I don't have time to do all these things. Mm-hmm. But finding people who know what they're doing in that space and working with them has been a real key. And there's a element of connecting on trust and values and all of those things. And I think that's really important. So I think that's one thing, is thinking about, what do I have, and can I think about it in more categories than just one? Mm-hmm. I think that's been things, so sort of diversification. I think the other thing is, as I'm sort of launching my children into the world, is how do I help them get started? I'm not saying give them some unfair advantage or anything there, but is there a way that I can build something with them? Mm-hmm. In other communities, like my wife was Amish until she was about 5 years old. And so a lot of her background is still in that community, so aunts and uncles and whatever. And in other parts of the world, it is very common for families, especially with lots of children, to help their children start businesses as a way of leaving them an inheritance or a legacy. Mm-hmm. So one of her uncles, for example, I think has started a sawmill, a construction company, a store, and all very successful businesses. Wow. I mean, these people are very entrepreneurial. Right. He runs them for a while. The kids work in that. And the understanding is, hey, when you're old enough and when I'm too old to do it, this is yours. And I think that is, I'm not saying that I have done that, but I think that's an amazing thing, is to think of, how do I help my kids get started in a way that might benefit me too, but also benefits them. Mm-hmm. And what better way to train them to be able to be successful in their own lives. So I've been thinking about that lately. Cool. In fact, one of my oldest is on the verge of starting her own coffee shop, so I'm partnering with her to get that going. sort of to explore that model, and it's an opportunity that just sort of came to us in that way. So I'm excited to see where that goes.
Cool. Johannes, thanks so much for joining today. You've given a lot of awesome insights in fatherhood, things that you have been incorporated growing up, as well as just things business-wise. And I love that we just ended on the idea of how can we have these business mindset things and instill them into our kids along the way. So thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me. I love the fireplace. Love talking to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right.